wanted an open marriage. Now she's all alone. We had been married for 5 years, and for most of those years, I believed we were doing all right. Clara and I weren't perfect, but who is? We had our routine, work, weekends with friends, dinners out, the occasional vacation. I was content. But Clara wasn't. I could tell. It wasn't something she said outright, but there was a shift in her over the last few months. She became distant in a way that was hard to pinpoint. It wasn't just the physical intimacy that faded, although that was part of it. It was more than that. Something in the way she looked at me when I spoke, something in the conversations we used to have that felt more like a chore than a connection. At first, I thought it was just a phase. Work stress, maybe. Life's burdens, all weighing down on her. But then it started happening more frequently. Nights when she'd stay up late, scrolling through her phone, her back turned to me in bed. Or when we'd go out with friends, and she'd disappear into conversation with someone else, leaving me alone at the table. It didn't take a genius to figure out that something was wrong. I didn't know how to approach her about it. It was one of those things where I didn't want to start a conversation that could shatter everything, but I couldn't ignore the change, either. So, I waited. I hoped it would pass on its own, or that somehow, we'd find our way back to the place we used to be. But one night, things came to a head. It was a Wednesday, late, and Clara had come home later than usual. She didn't have work, so I asked her, cautiously, how her evening had gone. "Fine," she replied, a little too quickly. But then she looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time that day, and said, "We need to talk." My stomach sank. I'd heard that line before, and I knew it was never a good thing. I set my book down, trying not to look too anxious, but I'm sure it was written all over my face. She sat down across from me, her legs crossed under her, as if she were preparing for a courtroom argument, and I was the defendant. "Dan," she began, her voice soft, almost too soft. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately." I nodded, unsure where this conversation was going. "Okay." She hesitated for a moment, chewing on her lower lip. She didn't seem nervous, but there was something guarded about her. Like she had already made up her mind, but wasn't sure how to say it. I think we need to try something different. Something new." My eyebrows furrowed. "Different how?" Clara took a deep breath. "I want to open our marriage." The words hit me like a slap. I wasn't sure if I'd heard her correctly. Open our marriage? I felt my pulse quicken, my stomach twisting into knots. "What do you mean? Like, you want us to see other people?" I couldn't help but let the disbelief seep into my voice. Clara nodded. "Yes. I think we've been stuck in a routine. We've been complacent, and it's not working for me anymore. I need more. I want to explore my own desires, without it meaning anything about our love for each other." I stared at her, my brain racing. This was something I had heard of before, sure. There were couples who explored open marriages, who set boundaries and rules, and somehow made it work. But this was my marriage. This was our life. And now Clara wanted to change everything. "I don't know, Clara." I trailed off, unsure of what to say. My thoughts were all over the place. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Was I really hearing this? Was she really asking for this? "I love you, Dan," she continued, her voice so calm, so collected. "But I feel like I'm missing something. I think this could give us both the space to grow. And maybe, it'll even bring us closer together in the end." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say no, to tell her that I wasn't interested in seeing other people, that I didn't need anyone else. But the words wouldn't come. It was like I was paralyzed, stuck in a moment where nothing made sense. I didn't know how to react. "Clara, I don't know," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure I can handle that." She reached across the table, placing her hand gently on mine. "I understand that it's a lot to take in, but I think it could be good for us. I'm not asking you to do anything you're not comfortable with, but I need you to at least consider it. Please." I pulled my hand away, feeling a knot forming in my throat. I wasn't angry, at least not yet, but I was confused. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that Clara, the woman I married, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, was asking for this. Asking for freedom from the very thing I had committed to. "We can talk about this," I said quietly. "I just need some time to think." She smiled, as if she had expected that response. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But I really think this could work. For both of us." As she left the room to get ready for bed, I sat there in the silence, my thoughts spinning wildly. I couldn't get the image of her with someone else out of my head. The idea made me sick to my stomach, yet there was a small part of me, buried beneath the confusion, that felt intrigued. What would this mean for me? For our marriage? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. Whatever we decided, things would never be the same again. The days after Clara's proposal felt like a fog. My mind couldn't seem to settle. I tried to focus on work, but everything kept coming back to that conversation. The words echoed in my head. "I want to open our marriage." It was impossible to ignore, and the more I thought about it, the more my stomach twisted into knots. I didn't know what to do with that idea. I didn't know how to reconcile it with the life we had built. Clara, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. She didn't seem to be struggling with the weight of what she had asked. If anything, she was calm. So calm that it made my anxiety feel more pronounced. Every time I saw her, she seemed more relaxed, more confident. It was as if she had already made her peace with it and was waiting for me to catch up. I tried to bring it up again the next day, after we'd both gotten home from work. She was in the kitchen, making dinner, humming to herself as if everything was perfectly normal. The contrast between her demeanor and the storm in my head couldn't have been more striking. "Clara," I said, trying to steady my voice. "About last night. I've been thinking about what you said." She looked up at me, her eyes soft and encouraging. "Good. I didn't want you to feel rushed, Dan. Take all the time you need. We don't have to make any decisions right away." I didn't know how to begin. "I don't know if I'm okay with this." She stepped closer, placing a hand on my arm. Her touch was gentle, but there was a certain urgency to it. "I know this is a lot, but I think it could help us both. You've been distant too, haven't you? I feel like we've stopped trying to connect the way we used to." Her words stung. It wasn't just the openness about what she wanted. It was the implication that our marriage had lost something vital. I knew it was true, but hearing it from her made me feel like I had failed her in some way. I hadn't been the husband she needed. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of change," I admitted, my voice strained. "I don't know if I can share you like that." Clara sighed, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Frustration. "Dan, I'm not asking you to give me up. I just want to explore. I love you, but I need more. I'm not saying this is the end of us. It's just a different way of looking at things." The conversation went on for hours, like a slow-burning fire that never seemed to die. We discussed boundaries, expectations, and the possible risks of what we were considering. It was clear that Clara had thought this through far more than I had. She had researched open marriages, talked to friends, and was fully convinced that it could work. As she spoke, I tried to listen, to keep my mind open, but all I could think about was the thought of her with someone else. That thought alone made my chest tighten, and I had to look away to keep from showing how much it hurt. "I need time, Clara," I said, my voice quieter now. "I need to really think about this." Clara nodded, a soft smile crossing her lips. "I understand. And I'm not asking you to agree immediately. I just need you to be open to it. We can figure it out together." That was the thing. She wanted to figure it out. She was willing to take this leap, to trust that it would lead somewhere positive. But I wasn't sure I could make that same leap. It felt like the ground was shifting beneath me, and every step I took felt like I was walking into unknown territory. That night, we lay in bed, but I couldn't sleep. Clara, however, seemed perfectly at ease. She had her back to me, the soft rise and fall of her breathing almost soothing in its rhythm. I couldn't stop staring at her. I wanted to reach out, to pull her close, but it felt wrong, like we were miles apart, even though we were lying right next to each other. I spent hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the decision. I thought about the promises we had made when we first got married, the vows we took, the dreams we shared. I thought about the intimacy we had once had, the feeling of being her only one, the way she used to look at me with love and admiration. Now, that seemed like a distant memory. But then, a small voice inside me reminded me that Clara was still the woman I loved. She was still the person I had built my life with. Did I want to lose her? Was this a last-ditch effort to save what we had, or was it the beginning of the end? The next few days passed in a haze. I kept thinking about what she had said, "I'm not asking you to give me up." But it felt like I was being asked to give up everything I had ever known about love, trust, and commitment. I wasn't sure I could do that. At dinner one evening, Clara casually mentioned the idea of going on a date with someone else. She didn't ask for my permission, but she spoke as if it were just another normal part of our routine. "I'm meeting someone for drinks on Friday," she said, her voice light. "I'll let you know how it goes." My heart dropped into my stomach, and I couldn't help the cold rush of panic that flooded through me. "Wait, what?" I managed to say, my voice a little too sharp. She looked up, confused. "It's just a date, Dan. I thought we'd talked about this." "We did talk about this," I said, my voice shaking now. "But hearing you talk about it like it's no big deal, like it's something I should just accept, it doesn't feel right." Clara's face softened, and she reached across the table to touch my hand. "I'm sorry. I know this is hard for you. But I really think you'll be okay once we get past the fear. You have to trust me, Dan." I pulled my hand away, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of what she was asking. I didn't trust her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I wasn't sure. The idea of an open marriage was supposed to be a solution, a way to bring us closer. But right then, all I felt was the chasm between us growing wider with every passing second. It had been weeks since that conversation, and I couldn't say things had gotten any easier. Clara had started seeing other people, as she'd promised. I never asked for details, but I could tell by the way she carried herself, more confident, more energetic, that she was finding something in those experiences that she wasn't finding at home. At first, I told myself that I could handle it. After all, she was still coming home to me every night, still saying she loved me, still acting like we were together in some way. But something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly, but I felt the distance growing between us. She'd come home late some nights, her perfume heavy in the air, and I would force myself to smile, to act like I wasn't aware of what was happening. I asked her about her dates sometimes, but I always regretted it. The way she'd talk about them, so casually, made my stomach churn. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that this was what we'd agreed to, but deep down, I felt betrayed. One evening, Clara came home late again, but this time there was something different in her eyes. She had a glow about her, a new kind of confidence, and it wasn't the kind that made me feel happy for her. It made me feel small. She was wearing a dress that I hadn't seen before, something a little too flashy, a little too unfamiliar. She smiled when she saw me, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey," she said, her voice light but strained. "I'm going to take a shower. I'll be down in a bit." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She disappeared upstairs, and I sat there, staring at the half-empty wine glass in front of me. I didn't know what had happened to us. Everything was slipping through my fingers, and I was too afraid to hold on tighter, afraid that the harder I tried, the more I'd suffocate what was left of us. When Clara came back down, she was in her usual relaxed state, as though nothing had changed. She went to the kitchen, humming to herself, as if she had just returned from a casual night out with friends. "You seem a little quiet tonight," she said, her back turned to me as she started making a cup of tea. I couldn't help myself anymore. The question that had been eating at me for weeks finally spilled out of me. "Clara, is this really what you want? All of this? Because I'm not sure I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep pretending that I'm okay with it." She stopped what she was doing and turned slowly to face me. There was no anger in her eyes, just sadness. It was the kind of sadness that you get when you realize something is already lost, but you don't want to admit it. Dan, I told you at the beginning that this might change things. I never promised it would be easy. I know this isn't what you expected, but I thought you'd come around. I thought you'd see how freeing it could be for both of us. My chest tightened. I had never wanted this. I had never asked for it. I thought we were supposed to grow together. But I feel like I'm losing you, Clara. I feel like I'm just holding on to something that's already gone. She sighed, her expression softening for just a moment. I don't want you to feel that way. I didn't want this to be the end of us, Dan. I really didn't. But it feels like we've been stuck for too long. I need to feel alive again. I need to know that I'm not just your wife, but someone who's free to explore and grow. And if you can't accept that, then maybe we're not meant to be in the same place anymore. Her words cut deeper than any argument we had ever had. She was right about one thing. We had been stuck. But I hadn't realized until now that I had been stuck in a way that I didn't want to be. Clara had become someone I didn't recognize anymore, and I wasn't sure how to reach her. I didn't know how to answer. I just sat there, staring at the table, trying to control the emotions that were bubbling up inside me. The confusion, the hurt, the anger. They all felt so overwhelming that I could barely breathe. She must have seen my internal struggle because she reached for my hand, but her touch felt foreign, like she was a stranger offering sympathy. It wasn't the same hand I had held during the good times. I never wanted to hurt you, Dan, she said, her voice soft but firm. But I think this is what I need. And maybe it's time for us to let go. Let go. The words felt like a slap to my face. You're telling me it's over? She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she just looked at me with those eyes that once held so much love, but now seemed distant. She was already a million miles away from me, emotionally, even if her body was still here. I think it's time, yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to keep hurting you, and I don't want to keep pretending like I'm not missing out on something. I need to be true to myself. I'm sorry, Dan. I couldn't speak. I couldn't say anything that would change this. The words I had imagined saying to her, the arguments I had in my head, none of them mattered anymore. She had made up her mind. She had already stepped away, and I was left to watch as the woman I loved slipped through my fingers like sand. That night, I slept on the couch. Clara was upstairs, and I heard her move around in the quiet of the house, the sound of her footsteps on the hardwood floors somehow amplifying the distance between us. When morning came, she was already gone. Her things were packed in a few boxes by the door, ready to be taken to wherever she was going next. I don't think she intended to hurt me. I don't think she meant for this to be the end. But in the end, she had already moved on. And I was left here, alone in the silence of a house that once felt like a home. The first few days after Clara left were a blur. The silence in the house was deafening, and every room seemed empty without her. I walked through the place we had shared for years, and it felt like a stranger's home. The familiar comfort of our life together had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the cold remnants of what was lost. I tried to keep busy, filling my days with work, pretending that I wasn't constantly thinking about her. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, my mind kept drifting back to Clara. I replayed everything over and over. Her words, her actions, the things I could have done differently. I found myself questioning everything about our relationship. Had I missed the signs? Had we been heading toward this for longer than I realized? Was it my fault? At night, I found it almost impossible to sleep. The bed felt like a vast, empty space. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the world outside, wondering where Clara was, who she was with. I couldn't stop myself from imagining her with someone else, laughing, sharing intimate moments. It wasn't jealousy anymore. It was something deeper, something raw, an aching realization that I had lost her for good. One evening, about a week after she left, I received a text message from her. It was simple, almost too simple. I hope you're doing okay, Dan. I miss you. Take care of yourself. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart pounding. I miss you. Those words, coming from her, should have made me feel better, but all they did was remind me of the life we had once shared. That was the problem. All I had left were memories of a version of Clara that no longer existed. And those memories, instead of offering comfort, only amplified the pain. I didn't know how to respond. What was there left to say? Everything felt so final, so irreversible. I couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was gone in a way that couldn't be undone. A few more days passed, and I finally mustered the courage to go through her things. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but I needed to understand where we went wrong, or at least find some sense of closure. I went into the bedroom, and her side of the closet was empty. All that remained were a few clothes I hadn't seen her wear in years. There were no pictures of us on the walls anymore, nothing that hinted at the life we had built. It was as if she had erased herself from this space, leaving only the skeleton of a relationship that no longer fit. I sat down on the edge of the bed, running my fingers along the cool sheets where she used to lie. I couldn't help but let the tears come. They were slow at first, but soon they became unstoppable. I felt like I was mourning the death of something I couldn't fully comprehend. I mourned the future we would never have, the dreams we had shared, and the love I thought would never end. In the days that followed, I began to reach out to people. Friends, family, anyone who could offer me advice or a distraction from the pain. I spoke to my best friend, Nick, about everything that had happened. He listened patiently, letting me vent my anger, confusion, and hurt. But when I finished talking, he gave me a hard look. "You can't keep blaming yourself, Dan," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's not your fault. Clara made her choice. She wanted something else. You didn't want that. It's as simple as that." "I know, but it's not that simple," I said, shaking my head. "She left because of something I couldn't give her. She didn't want to leave me, but she felt like she had to. And now she's out there, probably happier than she's ever been, and I'm just stuck." Nick sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Dan, I'm not going to tell you to forget her, or that you'll be fine in a few weeks. Because it's going to hurt for a while. But what you need to do right now is take care of yourself. You can't keep living in the past. You've got to start looking ahead." I didn't want to hear it. I wanted to wallow in my pain, to let it consume me until I had nothing left. But Nick was right. Clara was gone. And as much as I hated it, I had to accept that. I didn't know how to begin moving forward, but I knew I had to try. For the first time in a long time, I started focusing on myself. I went to the gym, even though I hadn't been in months. I started reading again, something I used to love but had abandoned in the chaos of my marriage. And slowly, very slowly, I began to reconnect with old friends, with the life I had left behind when I'd put all my energy into making Clara happy. But as I rebuilt my life, there were moments when the weight of it all would hit me, when I'd see something that reminded me of her, or hear a song that used to be our song. Those moments were like a punch to the gut, and I'd have to fight to keep from breaking down all over again. I didn't want anyone to see me like that. I didn't want to appear weak or vulnerable. But sometimes when I was alone, the grief would return with a vengeance, and I'd find myself back where I started, crying over the loss of someone I thought I couldn't live without. The hardest part, though, was when I realized that Clara wasn't the same person she had been when we first met. I had spent so long trying to hold on to the version of her that I knew, the woman who promised to love me forever, that I couldn't see the changes in her. And now, there was no going back. She had found something else, and it wasn't me. I didn't know what she was doing, where she was going, or who she was with. And at that moment, I realized something important. It didn't matter anymore. Because no matter how much I still loved her, she was gone. And I had to learn how to live with that.